A man saved a Mustang Foal, but when the whole wild herd surrounded him, what happened was shocking. The sun was setting low over the vast, rugged land of the American West, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. The desert seemed endless, a sea of brown and green stretching far into the horizon. The land was alive, even though it seemed empty at first glance. This was the wild heart of the West, where the mountains met the plains, and where the wind carried stories older than anyone could remember. Jack Malone, a man in his late 40s, stood quietly on the edge of his ranch, surveying the landscape. His rugged, weathered face was marked by years of working under the sun, his eyes sharp as he observed the land. Jack had spent most of his life here, working the land, riding the horses, and living the quiet, solitary life of a rancher. He knew every inch of this land like the back of his hand, from the towering cliffs to the dry riverbeds. But today, something felt different. He had spent most of the morning repairing fences, and now, as evening settled in, he took a moment to rest. The horses were grazing in the field, their tails swishing in the cool breeze. But then, something caught his attention. Off in the distance, he saw movement, something small and weak stumbling through the tall grass. At first, he thought it might be a coyote or some other small animal, but as he watched closer, he realized it was a foal, a Mustang Foal, struggling to walk. A foal alone, especially one as small and fragile as this, didn't survive long in the wild. Jack knew that. Wild Mustangs, although strong and independent, were still vulnerable at such a young age. It was a harsh world out here. Jack's heart went out to the little creature. He couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He had seen his fair share of wild horses, and while they were magnificent creatures, they weren't always the easiest to approach. Mustangs were known for their wild nature, for being untamed and free, but Jack had always respected them, admired their spirit. This foal, though, it needed help. Without hesitation, Jack moved towards the foal, his boots kicking up dust as he walked. He kept his movements slow and deliberate, not wanting to startle it. The foal's coat was a soft chestnut brown, its legs shaky as it tried to stand on its own. It made soft, helpless whinnies, calling for its mother. But there was no sign of any other horses around. As Jack got closer, the foal raised its head and eyed him cautiously. Jack stopped a few paces away, watching the little one carefully. He could tell that the foal was scared, its large, dark eyes wide with uncertainty. He knelt down slowly, making sure not to make any sudden movements. His heart was heavy with concern. "Easy now, little one," Jack murmured gently. He knew that animals could sense fear, and if he was too quick or too rough, it might frighten the foal even more. He needed to gain its trust. The foal, still trembling, took a cautious step forward. Jack reached out, his hands steady and calm, and gently touched the foal's mane. To his surprise, the foal didn't shy away. Instead, it leaned into his touch, a small sign of trust. Jack let out a quiet breath. The foal was weak, its tiny body shivering from the cold of the evening air. Jack looked around, trying to figure out where the foal's mother might be. There were no other horses in sight, and he knew that if the foal had been separated from the herd, it could be in real trouble. In the wild, the herd's bond was everything. Without the safety of its family, the foal stood little chance. The sun was setting fast, and it wouldn't be long before nightfall brought with it even more danger. Predators, the cold, and the loneliness of the wild. With no time to waste, Jack carefully scooped the foal into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, and its body was limp with exhaustion. He cradled it gently against his chest, speaking softly as he turned back towards his ranch. His mind raced. He wasn't sure if he could keep the foal alive through the night, but he had to try. The foal needed shelter, warmth, and food. As Jack walked back, he kept his eyes on the horizon, hoping that the foal's mother might appear from somewhere. But there was nothing. No sign of the wild herd. The ranch was still a good distance away, and he didn't know how long the foal had been wandering. But he could feel its weak heartbeat against his chest. He needed to move quickly. He reached the barn, and with one last glance over his shoulder, he hurried inside, where he gently placed the foal in the hay, keeping it close and warm. He went to fetch some water and a small blanket to wrap around the foal. Jack wasn't sure how he was going to care for it. He wasn't a vet, and he had no experience raising a wild Mustang foal. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let it die out here. As he tended to the foal, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced around, but the barn was quiet. Still, the feeling lingered. Something in his gut told him that the foal's disappearance wasn't the only thing he should be worried about. Outside, the wind began to pick up, and the sky darkened as night started to fall. But it wasn't the wind or the night that had Jack on edge. No, it was the sound he heard next. The unmistakable thundering of hooves in the distance, growing louder by the second. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was: the wild herd. They were coming. For a brief moment, Jack considered what he should do. Should he stay inside the barn with the foal and wait for the herd to pass by? Or should he try to take the foal farther away, perhaps even back into the wild? But Jack knew one thing for sure: he could no longer ignore the reality of the situation. The foal's herd was coming, and with them, whatever happened next would be out of his hands. The thundering hooves grew louder, faster. Jack looked out the barn doors, his pulse quickening. What would happen when the herd saw him? Would they charge? Would they attack? He had no way of knowing. All he could do now was wait and hope that the trust he had built with the foal was enough to protect them both. The barn was still, except for the soft rustling of the foal as it shifted in the hay. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, each beat matching the sound of the hooves he could hear growing louder in the distance. He had no idea how many horses were out there, but from the sound of it, the entire herd was charging toward the barn. The noise echoed through the open plains, bouncing off the distant hills and creating a sense of urgency in Jack's mind. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The foal had fallen asleep in the hay, its small body curled up in a way that made Jack's heart swell with affection. It was safe for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in. The wild herd was on its way, and he knew that if they came too close, things could get out of control quickly. Jack stepped toward the barn doors and looked outside, squinting as the dimming sunlight made it difficult to see clearly. But even with the fading light, he could make out the distant shapes moving through the tall grass. They were coming fast, a lot faster than he had expected. The rancher's mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do. If he stayed in the barn, he would be trapped. The herd might circle the area, and with a foal in his care, he knew there was a chance they could become aggressive, trying to get their young one back. He had heard stories about wild Mustangs protecting their own with an almost fierce dedication, and he wasn't sure what would happen if they saw him as an intruder. For a moment, Jack considered moving the foal to a different part of the ranch, somewhere farther away from the herd. But the thought of carrying it out into the open plains, where there was nowhere to hide, didn't seem much better. He would be exposed, and the herd could easily overwhelm him. No, he had to stay close to the barn. It was the safest place for the foal, and maybe, just maybe, he could talk the horses down when they arrived. He had spent his whole life around animals, so surely he could manage this. The thundering hooves continued to get louder, and Jack realized he didn't have much time left. With a deep breath, he made up his mind. He closed the barn doors just enough to leave a small crack, enough to see what was happening, but not enough to expose himself. Then he returned to the foal, trying to calm his racing heart. He needed to keep it calm, too. The foal was already frightened, and he could sense the tension building. The last thing he wanted was for the foal to panic at the wrong moment. Jack sat down on a nearby crate, his eyes never leaving the crack in the barn door. He could see the figures of the wild horses now, their dark silhouettes galloping toward him. The sight was awe-inspiring, the power and grace of the horses as they ran in perfect unity. The led mare, a tall and proud-looking animal, was at the front of the group. Behind her, dozens of other horses followed, their hooves striking the ground with incredible force. The ground beneath Jack seemed to shake as they closed in. Jack swallowed hard and rubbed his hands together. He wasn't sure what to expect when they reached the barn. Would they just pass by, or would they stop? Would they notice the foal inside? His mind was full of questions, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to stay calm. The horses could sense fear, and if he showed any sign of it, things could go south in an instant. The sound of hooves grew louder, and the barn seemed to close in on him. Jack's heart was in his throat now, the pressure mounting with each passing second. He had never felt so exposed. He could hear the leader of the herd approaching, the sound of hooves growing clearer. Then, without warning, a single, powerful thud echoed from just outside the barn. The first horse had arrived. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He dared not move as he peered through the crack in the door. The mare had stopped just outside, her dark eyes scanning the barn. The wind blew, rustling the hay and carrying the scent of the foal to her. Jack could almost feel her presence through the crack, so close that he could hear her breathing. Her gaze seemed to pierce through him, and for a moment Jack thought she might charge at the barn. But then something surprising happened. The mare took a step back, just enough to give space for the others to follow. One by one, the horses appeared. First, a stallion, then a few more mares, followed by the younger ones. Jack counted at least a dozen of them, all gathered just outside the barn surrounding him. They moved with a kind of unity that made Jack realize how tightly knit the herd was. These horses weren't just individuals. They were a family, bound together by instinct and a deep, unspoken connection. Jack's heart beat faster. He had never been this close to such a large group of wild mustangs. From the barn, he could feel the energy in the air, the pulse of the wild animals that surrounded him. They were watching him closely, their eyes trained on the barn doors, waiting. The foal inside shifted in the hay, and Jack's fingers tightened. He had to keep the foal calm, but he couldn't risk making a move yet. He needed to know what the horses would do. The lead mare stepped forward once again, her presence commanding. She approached the barn slowly, and as she did, Jack noticed something that made him pause. She wasn't coming at him with the intent to attack. No, she was simply assessing, watching. Jack's heart steadied just a little. He had heard stories of wild mustangs being territorial, but this didn't feel like an immediate threat. The mare wasn't rushing to reclaim the foal. She was waiting. Jack stayed as still as possible, not wanting to disturb the delicate balance that seemed to be forming. He kept his eyes on the mare as she circled the barn, her body moving gracefully, her eyes never leaving him. It was as if she was trying to figure him out. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The tension in the air was thick, but something in the way the mare moved told Jack that she wasn't there to fight him. She was testing him, just as he had tested the foal's trust earlier. Finally, the mare stopped. just out of sight of the barn door. She turned her head and let out a low whinny, a soft sound that carried through the still air. Jack didn't know what it meant, but it was the first time since the herd's arrival that the atmosphere seemed to shift. The horses stood still now, as if waiting for some signal. What they were waiting for, Jack wasn't sure, but he knew that for the moment, they weren't charging. The mare's whinny seemed to carry an invitation, but to what? Jack could only wonder, as the wild herd remained just outside, silent and expectant. The air felt thick with tension as Jack remained in the barn, his heart still pounding in his chest. Outside, the wild mustangs stood silently in the fading light, their dark figures like shadows against the evening sky. The lead mare, the one who had come so close to the barn, was standing a few paces away, watching intently. Her gaze never wavered from Jack, and he could feel the weight of her eyes on him. It was as though she was trying to understand him, to figure out who he was and what his intentions might be. The rest of the herd stood in the distance, waiting quietly, giving Jack a moment to breathe, but not one that allowed him to relax. The stillness in the air felt like a warning. The foal, still resting in the hay, shifted slightly. Jack glanced over at it, relieved to see that it seemed to be settling, its small body curled up in the soft straw. He felt a deep sense of responsibility for the foal now. He had promised to keep it safe, and he was doing everything in his power to honor that promise. But as he turned back to the mare, he realized that his presence here had not gone unnoticed by the herd. They knew he had saved their young one, but what did that mean for them? Did they see him as a friend, or was he still an intruder in their world? The mare took a step forward, the earth beneath her hooves seeming to tremble with each movement. Jack didn't move. He couldn't. The air around him was charged with the wild energy of the mustangs, and he was afraid that any wrong move would make them feel threatened. The mare's eyes locked onto his once again, and this time Jack noticed something different. There was no aggression in her gaze, no hostility. Instead, there was a kind of quiet curiosity. She wasn't attacking, but she wasn't entirely at ease either. It was as if she was studying him, trying to determine whether he was a danger or an ally. For a long moment they simply stood there, locked in an unspoken exchange. Jack could hear the soft rustling of the other horses, but he kept his focus on the lead mare. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as she took a few more steps towards the barn. Jack held his breath, wondering what she would do next. Then, to his surprise, she stopped right outside the barn doors. The mare tilted her head slightly to the side, as if she were contemplating something. Jack didn't dare move or make a sound. He had no idea what this moment meant, but he had the sense that it was critical. Everything had led to this point, and how he responded now would shape what happened next. The mare whinnied softly, a sound that echoed through the barn. It wasn't loud or forceful, but there was a sense of authority in it. It was a call, maybe to the rest of the herd, or perhaps to the foal. The moment the sound left her mouth, the other mustangs moved. The stallions shifted their weight, and the mares stepped forward in unison. Jack watched as they circled the barn, their powerful bodies moving like a wave of energy. But still, no one seemed aggressive. They were moving with purpose, but not to attack. It was more like they were preparing for something, gathering their strength. Jack could feel his heart rate slow, though it was still beating fast. He was still on edge, unsure of what to expect. These were wild creatures, untamed and free. He had only ever seen them from a distance and never this close. Yet somehow, this felt different. The way the horses were acting wasn't the way a wild animal would react to an intruder. They were being cautious, yes, but they didn't seem to view him as an enemy. A few of the younger horses, their coats still a little scruffy, stepped closer to the barn. Jack held his breath, but then something unexpected happened. One of the younger horses, no older than a year or two, moved towards the barn door with a curious look in its eyes. It was smaller than the others, its legs a little unsteady, but it moved with a certain confidence. Jack couldn't help but smile softly. It reminded him of the foal, weak and small just hours earlier, now resting inside the barn. The young Mustang paused just outside the door, its ears twitching as it sniffed the air. Jack remained still, not wanting to startle it. He wondered what it would do. The herd had circled, but they hadn't come any closer. They seemed to be waiting for something. Was the foal's presence enough to calm them, or was there something more that needed to happen? To Jack's surprise, the young horse took another step closer, pushing its nose gently against the barn door. It wasn't pushing to get inside, but more as if it was testing the air, testing the space around it. Jack's heart softened. This was a wild creature, untamed by human hands, yet here it was, so close. He couldn't help but wonder what it saw in him. Could it sense that he had saved its herd member? That he wasn't a threat, but a protector? The young horse stood there for a few more seconds, sniffing, its ears flicking back and forth. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, it turned and trotted back to the others, who were still watching from a distance. The herd seemed to take its lead. The mare that had been so close to the barn stepped forward again, and for the first time, Jack saw the full extent of her size. She was tall, with a muscular build, her coat a rich brown that blended perfectly with the evening shadows. She was magnificent, a true symbol of the wild. Jack watched as the mare raised her head and let out another whinny, a low, drawn-out sound that seemed to fill the air. This time it was different. It was softer, more like a greeting than a warning. Jack, sensing the change, took a deep breath. The horses had circled around, but they had not attacked. Instead, they were now waiting for something. Waiting for him, perhaps. The stallion, a larger, more imposing horse, stepped forward and joined the mare, standing at her side. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Jack could almost sense the bond between them, an unspoken connection built through years of survival and mutual understanding. The other horses followed, stepping closer to the barn, but not crossing the threshold. Jack watched them, mesmerized by their grace and strength. The way they moved, so fluid and coordinated, was like nothing he had ever seen. Then, it happened. The lead mare finally turned away from the barn, her body language shifting. It was subtle, but Jack noticed it immediately. She wasn't retreating, but she was signaling to the rest of the herd. Slowly they began to move in the opposite direction, their powerful bodies swaying in unison as they turned and began to walk back toward the open plains. Jack didn't move. He stood there, watching, his heart still racing, but no longer out of fear. He could hardly believe what was happening. The wild herd, the very creatures that could have attacked him for getting too close, were now walking away. They weren't chasing him. They weren't angry. They were simply moving on, back to the vast wilderness where they belonged. As the horses disappeared into the distance, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had saved the foal, and the herd had recognized that. They hadn't seen him as an enemy after all. They had accepted him, if only for a moment, and now they were returning to the wild. Jack watched them until they were nothing more than shadows on the horizon, and for the first time that evening, he felt truly at peace. The sun had merely set, leaving behind a sky filled with soft purples and fading pinks. The world outside the barn was beginning to cool, but Jack still stood by the barn doors, unable to tear his eyes away from the spot where the wild horses had disappeared. The thundering hooves that had once felt so close and threatening were now a distant sound, fading with the wind. The herd had left, but Jack couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of awe. What had just happened? As he stood there, a feeling of gratitude washed over him. The wild horses had not attacked him, nor had they chased him away. Instead, they had accepted the foal's rescue, even if they didn't fully understand it. They had left peacefully, as though they had given him their silent approval. Jack had always respected the wildness of these animals, but now, for the first time, he felt like he had truly shared something with them. He turned back to the foal, still resting in the warm hay. The little creature seemed peaceful now, its breathing slow and steady. Jack knelt down beside it, running a hand gently over its soft coat. The foal was weak, but there was a lightness to its body now that hadn't been there before. It had found some comfort, and for the moment, it seemed safe. But Jack knew that the foal still needed help. It had come to him in a vulnerable state, and even though the herd had left, the threat of the wild was always present. The foal would need food and care before it could be returned to the wild. Jack didn't know how he could raise a Mustang, but he was determined to try. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let the foal suffer now. He stood up and began walking to the small storage area in the back of the barn where he kept supplies. He had some old blankets, a few buckets of water and feed for the horses, though he wasn't sure it would be suitable for the foal. Still, he knew he had to do something. As Jack worked, he couldn't help but think back to the moments when the wild herd had surrounded him. The mares, the stallions, and the foal's mother. All of them had been so close, and yet they had not attacked. It had been an incredible moment, and Jack realized just how rare it was. Wild Mustangs were not known for their trust in humans. They were untamed, free, and fiercely protective of their own. But Jack had witnessed something different that evening. It was as though, for a brief moment, the line between human and wild had blurred. He returned to the foal, carrying a small bucket of water and a handful of hay. As he placed the hay in front of the foal, he noticed that it was beginning to stir again. The foal lifted its head, its large dark eyes blinking in the soft light. Jack smiled at it, his heart swelling with hope. He wasn't sure how long it would take, but he knew the foal had a chance now. As he gently guided the foal toward the food, he couldn't help but think about the herd. What were they doing now? Had they truly accepted him, or had they simply left because they knew it was time? Jack couldn't say for sure, but there was something about the way the mare had looked at him, the way the herd had circled and then peacefully moved on, that made him feel as though they had acknowledged him in their own way. They had seen him for what he was, just a man trying to help, trying to do the right thing. The foal took a few small bites of the hay, and Jack watched closely, making sure it didn't strain itself. It was weak, but it had spirit. Jack knew that, with time, it would grow stronger. He just had to keep it safe long enough for it to regain its strength. As the foal ate, Jack thought about what to do next. He couldn't keep the foal here forever. It belonged to the wild, and that was where it needed to be. But he couldn't just release it back into the wilderness in its current state. It needed more time. He had to be patient. Jack spent the next few hours in the barn, taking care of the foal and preparing a small makeshift bed for it in the hay. He kept the barn quiet, not wanting to stress the foal out. He also kept an eye on the horizon, hoping to see the herd return, but he knew that was unlikely. They had gone, and they had left him with the foal. It was up to Jack now to decide what came next. As night fell fully over the land, the barn grew darker, but Jack didn't mind. The barn was a place of comfort, a place of refuge. It had always been a sanctuary for him and his horses, and now It was the foal's sanctuary, too. Jack sat on a stool, watching over the foal as it rested. His thoughts wandered, and he found himself thinking about the wild herd once more. What if the foal never reunited with them? What if it never found its way back to the wilderness? Could he take care of it? Could he give it the life it deserved? These questions weighed heavily on Jack's mind, but he knew that for tonight, there was only one thing he could do: care for the foal. The future was uncertain, but that didn't matter right now. All that mattered was this moment. He could give the foal a chance that it wouldn't have had if he hadn't stepped in. The night passed quietly, and as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jack stood up and stretched. He could hear the distant calls of birds and the soft rustling of the wind outside. He walked to the barn doors and pushed them open slightly, looking out at the land beyond. It was peaceful, still, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack felt a deep sense of contentment. He turned back to the foal, who was still sleeping soundly in the hay. Jack smiled. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but for now, the foal was safe. He had given it a chance, and that was all he could do. The rest he would leave to time and nature. As he closed the barn doors, Jack made a promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to help the foal. He would care for it until it was strong enough to stand on its own, to run free with the wild herd once again. And if that day never came, if the foal never rejoined its family, Jack would still be there. He had already saved one life, and he wouldn't stop now. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next as Jack continued to care for the foal. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day. The little Mustang, once weak and vulnerable, was slowly gaining strength. Its coat had started to shine with a healthy luster, and its steps, though still unsteady, were becoming more sure. Jack spent hours each day beside the foal, talking to it softly, feeding it, and ensuring that it had everything it needed to survive. Every now and then, Jack would look out across the open fields, wondering what the wild herd was doing. He hadn't seen them since that fateful evening when they had circled the barn, but in his heart he knew that the foal belonged to the wild. It wasn't his to keep. Not really. He had only stepped in because the foal had been in danger. He couldn't deny the feeling of responsibility he now felt, but he knew that he could never truly replace the freedom the foal would find among its own kind. The foal had been growing stronger, but Jack still kept it close. It wasn't ready to face the wilderness yet. The wild world was unpredictable, and the foal wasn't prepared for the challenges it would face. Jack had learned so much about the Mustang Foal during their time together, how it nuzzled against him when it was hungry, how it would rest its head on his shoulder when it felt safe. He had come to care for the foal deeply, and he didn't know when the right moment would come for him to let go. One afternoon, Jack led the foal outside into the open air. The wind had a soft, warm breeze to it, and the sky was clear and blue. The foal, now much stronger, trotted beside him, its movements more fluid, though still a little unsure. Jack smiled, proud of the progress the foal had made. They walked across the land, past the old oak tree where Jack had often sat to watch the horizon. There was a sense of freedom in the air, something Jack hadn't felt in a long time. He watched the foal as it playfully kicked its legs and trotted ahead of him. It was starting to explore the land around it, testing its limits. Jack stopped for a moment, his gaze fixed on the open fields, stretching out before him. He could almost hear the sound of the herd's hooves in the distance. Could they be out there somewhere, waiting for the foal to return to them? Jack wasn't sure, but deep down, he knew that the foal's time with him was coming to an end. He couldn't keep it forever. It belonged to the wild, to the open plains, to the herd it had come from. As the foal wandered ahead of him, Jack began to wonder what the herd would think if they returned and found the foal gone. Would they accept it again? Would they even remember it? Or would they see the foal as an outsider, someone who had been away too long? He had no answers, but in his heart Jack knew that it was time to let go. The foal had a life to live, and Jack had done everything he could to help it get to this point. The rest was up to the wild. Suddenly, Jack heard a sound in the distance. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder. Hooves. The unmistakable sound of horses running. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He turned, looking toward the horizon, and there, just as he had hoped, he saw the figures of wild horses galloping across the plains. They were coming closer, fast and powerful, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The herd had returned. The lead mare was at the front, with the stallions and mares behind her, each one moving as one. It was a sight unlike any other. The wild horses in their element, free and untamed. Jack's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sadness. The foal had been part of this, had belonged to this world, and now it was time for it to go back. The foal turned when it heard the sound, its ears twitching. Jack could see the recognition in its eyes. It knew what was happening. The foal lifted its head, its legs strong and steady beneath it. It took a few steps forward, its body moving with a confidence Jack had not seen before. The herd was almost upon them now, and Jack stepped back, giving the foal space. He didn't want to interfere anymore. The foal had found its place among the wild horses, and Jack had done all he could to prepare it for this moment. The mare, the one who had first approached the barn that night, was the first to reach the foal. She stopped in front of it, her dark eyes locking onto the foal's. There was no aggression in her stance, no hostility. She was simply observing, waiting. The foal moved closer to her, and for a moment there was silence between them. Jack held his breath, unsure of what would happen next. Then the mare gave a soft, low whinny, and the foal nuzzled her gently. It was a quiet reunion, one without words, but full of meaning. Jack watched in awe, his heart full as the foal and the mare stood together. This was it. The foal had found its way home. The rest of the herd gathered around them, their bodies forming a protective circle. They were watching the foal, as though welcoming it back into the fold. Jack stood at a distance, giving them space, not wanting to intrude on this moment. The foal had been a part of their world all along, and now it was finally returning to where it belonged. Jack felt a bittersweet smile tug at the corners of his mouth. He had known this day would come, but it didn't make it any easier. The foal had become a part of his life, and now he had to let it go. But there was a peace in knowing that he had done the right thing. He had given the foal a chance, and in return, the foal had given him something he couldn't explain, a connection to the wild, to the freedom that the Mustangs represented. As the herd began to move, the foal trotted alongside them, its small body fitting perfectly among the wild horses. They moved as one, a single unit, their hooves pounding the earth in a rhythmic pattern. Jack watched them go, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and loss at the same time. The foal had been a part of his world, but now it was free. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the wild with it. Jack took one last look at the herd, then turned and walked back to the barn. He didn't need to watch them disappear. He knew where they were going, and he knew that the foal was safe. It was a quiet ending to a story that had begun with a simple act of kindness. But to Jack, it was everything. He had saved a life, and in doing so, he had learned something valuable. Sometimes, The best way to love something is to let it go. The foal was free now, and Jack had given it the opportunity to live the life it was meant to live. As he walked back to his ranch, Jack felt a peace that he hadn't known before. He didn't need to hold on to the foal anymore. It was where it was supposed to be, out there, running with the wild herd, just as it had always been meant to. The sun had risen earlier than Jack expected that morning, its warm rays breaking through the barn's small windows and casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Jack had been awake for hours, sitting quietly in the barn, watching over the foal as it slept soundly in the hay. The foal had come a long way since the night Jack found it, weak and vulnerable. Now it was stronger, with a coat that gleamed in the morning light and legs that were steadily gaining strength. But even with all this progress, Jack still felt a weight on his chest. It was time. Jack had known from the very first day he saved the foal that it didn't belong to him. The foal was wild, part of a world Jack could only glimpse from the distance. The wild herd had accepted the foal in their own way, and now, with each passing day, the foal was slowly starting to remember its place in that world. Jack had spent the last few weeks caring for it, offering protection, food, and comfort. And yet, deep inside, he knew that the foal was not meant to stay in the barn forever. He had done his part. He had given the foal a chance at life, a chance to grow strong again. But now it was time for the foal to return to its herd, to find its place among the wild mustangs that roamed the plains. Jack couldn't keep it. He had to let go. That morning, as Jack stepped outside, he felt the weight of that decision settle in his heart. The sky above was vast and clear, a perfect blue that stretched out for miles. The wind was gentle, rustling the trees and carrying the earthy scent of the plains. Jack knew this was the right time. The foal had become strong enough to face the wild again. It had grown, learned, and healed, and now it needed to be with the herd. He walked back to the barn where the foal lay, still peacefully sleeping in the hay. As he approached, the foal stirred, its ears twitching as it woke up. For a moment the foal blinked at Jack, as though trying to understand what was happening. Jack smiled softly, his heart aching. He crouched down beside the foal and ran his hand through its mane, brushing away the loose strands of hay. "Hey there, little one," Jack whispered, his voice gentle.
You're ready. It's time for you to go home.
The foal stood up slowly, stretching its legs and shaking off the sleepiness. It looked at Jack with those big dark eyes, full of curiosity and trust. Jack's throat tightened as he looked into the foal's gaze, but he knew this was the right thing to do. He opened the barn door and stepped out into the sunlight, the foal following closely behind him. Jack turned around and looked one last time at the barn, a place that had given the foal shelter and comfort, but it was not its home. The foal belonged out there, in the wide open spaces where it could run freely, surrounded by the wild. As they walked toward the edge of the ranch, Jack's heart raced with a mix of emotions. There was sadness, of course, in knowing he would no longer see the foal every day, no longer be there to care for it, but there was also a sense of peace. He had done everything he could for the foal. Now it was time for it to live the life it was meant to live. The sun was higher in the sky now, warming the earth beneath their feet. The foal trotted ahead of Jack, its movements growing bolder with each step. Jack watched it with a sense of pride, knowing that it was ready for the next step of its journey. The foal had been so fragile when it first arrived, but now it was full of life and energy. It was growing into the wild creature it was always meant to be. As they walked through the open fields, Jack kept his eyes on the horizon. He couldn't help but wonder if the wild herd was out there, waiting for the foal to return. Had they missed it? Would they accept it again? Jack didn't have the answers, but he hoped that the foal would find its place with them, as it had before. Just as they reached the edge of the ranch, Jack heard something in the distance. It was faint at first, but as the sound grew louder, Jack realized what it was: the unmistakable thundering of hooves. His heart skipped a beat. The wild herd was coming. Jack turned to the foal, who had stopped and was now standing still, ears pricked forward, listening. It was as if the foal knew what was happening. It stood there for a moment, then slowly began to move forward, its legs steady and strong. Jack took a deep breath, a lump forming in his throat. He stepped back, giving the foal space. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when the foal would return to the wild. The foal trotted ahead, and Jack watched as the wild horses emerged from the trees, their figures growing clearer with every passing second. The lead mare was at the front, just as she had been before, her strong presence commanding the attention of the herd. Behind her, the rest of the mustangs followed, their hooves pounding the earth in a rhythmic, powerful beat. The foal quickened its pace, its movements more confident now. Jack stood still, his heart swelling with emotion as he watched the foal approach the herd. He had been right all along. This foal wasn't meant for a life of captivity. It belonged out here, in the wild, where it could run free, where it could truly be itself. The mare slowed as she neared the foal, and for a moment everything seemed to stand still. The foal and the mare locked eyes, and Jack watched in awe as they exchanged a quiet moment of recognition. Then the foal nuzzled the mare gently, and Jack could feel his heart swell with a sense of relief. The foal was home. It was with its kind again, where it belonged. The herd gathered around the foal, and Jack stepped back, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. This was the way it was supposed to be. The foal was no longer his responsibility. It had found its way back to its family, back to the wild where it was free to roam and grow. Jack stood there for a few moments, watching the foal rejoin the herd. He could feel the weight of the past few weeks lifting off his shoulders. He had done the right thing. He had given the foal a chance, and now it was free. The wild herd moved together, their powerful bodies moving as one. And Jack smiled as he turned to walk back to the ranch. As he walked, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment.